Staff Sergeant Maria Santos pressed her eye against the spotting scope, scanning the mountainous terrain through the pre-dawn darkness. The wind gauge beside her position showed consistent gusts of 15 to 20 miles per hour, with occasional spikes that made her jaw clench. At 2,700 meters, even a slight miscalculation would mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Target acquisition negative, she whispered into her throat mic, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The temperature had dropped to minus 12 degrees Fahrenheit, and, despite her cold weather gear, she could feel the mountains bite seeping through her bones. Her spotter, Petty Officer First Class Jake Morrison, lay motionless beside her, his own scope trained on the distant compound. "Command, this is Overwatch 7. Morrison spoke softly into the radio. "We're in position at Grid Echo 729. Visibility is compromised by weather conditions. Request confirmation on timeline." The crackling response came through their earpieces. "Overwatch 7, you have a 6-hour window starting at 0600 hours. High-value target will be mobile after that time frame. This is your only opportunity." Santos had been briefed on the target 48 hours earlier in a sterile conference room at the forward operating base. The man they needed to eliminate had orchestrated 3 separate bombing attacks against civilian populations, and intelligence indicated he was planning something far worse. Traditional extraction or airstrikes were impossible due to the location. A heavily fortified compound built into the mountainside, surrounded by innocent villagers who had no choice but to live under his protection. The shot they were asking her to make was beyond anything attempted in combat conditions. The longest confirmed sniper kill in military history was 2,475 meters, achieved by a Canadian Special Forces operator in Afghanistan. Santos was being asked to exceed that distance by more than 200 meters, in weather conditions that would challenge even the most advanced equipment. Her rifle, a custom-built Chaytak M200 intervention, was capable of the distance theoretically. The .408 caliber round could maintain lethal velocity beyond 2,800 meters, but accuracy at that range depended on variables that seemed to multiply exponentially with distance. Wind speed, air pressure, temperature, humidity, the Coriolis effect from the Earth's rotation. Each factor could push her shot inches or even feet off target. 8 years of training for this moment, she thought, remembering her first day at sniper school when the instructors had told her class that precision shooting was 10% equipment and 90% mental discipline. She had graduated top of her class, but even then, the longest practice shot she had taken was 1,800 meters under perfect conditions. Morrison adjusted his position slightly, checking the ballistic computer mounted to his equipment. Environmental data is stable for now, but we're looking at a pressure system moving in around noon. Wind patterns are going to shift significantly. Santos nodded, not taking her eye from the scope. She had studied the weather reports obsessively during their 3-day journey to this position. The team had hiked 26 miles through terrain that challenged mountain goats, carrying equipment that weighed nearly 80 pounds per person. They had established their hide site during the previous night, carefully arranging camouflage and ensuring their position was invisible from every possible angle of observation. The compound below seemed impossibly distant, even through her high-powered optics. She could make out the general structure, a main building carved directly into the mountainside, with several smaller outbuildings scattered around a courtyard. Intelligence had provided detailed architectural plans, but seeing the actual location drove home the complexity of their assignment. Target building has reinforced concrete walls, Morrison reminded her, reading from his mission notes. Windows are bulletproof glass, minimum 2 inches thick. The only viable shot is the observation deck on the eastern side, between 0800 and 0915 hours when he conducts his morning security briefing. Santos had memorized every detail of the target's daily routine. The man was paranoid about his security, but intelligence had identified one weakness in his pattern. Each morning, he would spend exactly 75 minutes on the observation deck, reviewing reports from his subordinates and scanning the surrounding area with binoculars. During that time, he would be exposed for brief moments when he moved between different sections of the deck. The window of opportunity would last perhaps 30 seconds total, split across multiple brief exposures. She would have one shot, maybe two if she was extraordinarily lucky. Miss, and the target would disappear underground for months, possibly years. Worse, their position would be compromised, and extraction would become a nightmare through hostile territory. Morrison's voice interrupted her thoughts. Movement in the compound. Guards are beginning their shift change. Santos watched through her scope as small figures moved between buildings below. Even at maximum magnification, the people looked like ants. The human mind struggled to comprehend the actual distance involved. If she fired now, her bullet would travel for over 4 seconds before impact, covering a distance longer than 27 football fields placed end to end. Wind is holding steady at 17 miles per hour from the northwest, Morrison reported, consulting his instruments. Temperature is -11 and stable. Barometric pressure is falling slowly, but should remain consistent for the next 4 hours. Santos made minute adjustments to her rifle's position, checking and rechecking her scope settings. The weapon had been zeroed precisely for these conditions, but theory and reality often diverged at extreme distances. She had requested specific ammunition for this mission. Match-grade .408 rounds with boat-tail bullets designed for maximum ballistic coefficient. Each round cost nearly $40, and she carried only 12 in her possession. Overwatch 7, this is command, the radio crackled. Weather satellite shows storm front approaching your position. Timeline may be accelerated. Confirm your status. Morrison keyed his mic command. Overwatch 7 is in position and ready. Target area is under observation. We can execute when the opportunity presents itself. Santos felt the familiar calm settling over her mind, the same mental state she had cultivated through thousands of practice sessions. Her heart rate slowed, her breathing became deeper and more controlled. This was the zone where precision shooters lived or died, a place where calculation met intuition, where years of training crystallized into a single moment of perfect execution. The first hint of dawn was beginning to touch the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of deep purple and orange. In 3 hours, when the sun reached the optimal position, her target would emerge onto that distant observation deck. Until then, there was nothing to do but wait, observe, and prepare for a shot that would either make history or end in failure. Morrison shifted slightly beside her, adjusting his own equipment. You know what they're saying back at base about this mission? Santos kept her eye pressed to the scope. I don't want to know. They're calling it the impossible shot. Vegas has odds running against success. Good thing I don't gamble, she replied, though she understood the sentiment. What they were attempting pushed the absolute limits of what current technology and human skill could achieve. The margin for error was so small that it essentially didn't exist. But as she lay there in the growing light, watching the distant compound through her scope, Santos felt something she hadn't expected. Not fear, not doubt, but a deep sense of purpose. 8 years of training, 3 years of combat experience, and countless hours of practice had brought her to this moment. Whether impossible or not, this was what she had been born to do. The first rays of sunlight struck the mountain peaks around 7:30, casting long shadows across the valley below. Santos had been motionless for nearly 2 hours, her body adapted to the uncomfortable position that provided the most stable shooting platform. Her muscles had moved beyond cramping into a state of controlled numbness that she knew would cost her later. But, for now, absolute stillness was more important than comfort. Morrison lowered his spotting scope briefly to rub his eyes, then returned to his observation. Guards on the perimeter are following standard pattern. No indication they've detected our presence. He paused, consulting his notebook. Intelligence reports confirm target is in the compound. Radio intercepts show he's maintaining his normal schedule. Santos had been thinking about the shot mechanics for hours, running calculations in her head that the ballistic computer had already completed. At 2,700 meters, her bullet would drop approximately 190 inches from the point of aim, requiring her to hold high by more than 15 feet. The drift caused by wind would push the round another 8 inches to the right, assuming current conditions held steady. But those were just the basic calculations. The Coriolis effect, caused by the Earth's rotation, would deflect her bullet an additional 2 inches to the right at this distance. The angle of the shot, nearly 30 degrees downward from their mountain position to the target area, would affect the trajectory in subtle ways that required experience to judge accurately. Temperatures climbing, Morrison noted, checking his instruments. Up to -8 degrees. That'll change your muzzle velocity slightly. Santos made a mental note to adjust her point of aim. Warmer air was less dense, which meant her bullet would travel faster and drop less over the distance. The difference might only be an inch or two, but at 2,700 meters, inches mattered more than lives. Her radio earpiece crackled softly. Overwatch 7, this is Command. Human Assets Report Target is conducting morning briefing on schedule. Estimate exposure window will begin in approximately 45 minutes. Morrison acknowledged the transmission while Santos continued her vigil through the scope. She had identified 17 different reference points along the route her bullet would travel, using trees, rocks, and terrain features to help gauge wind conditions at various distances. The wind closest to her position was easy to read, but conditions near the target could be completely different. "I've got movement on the observation deck," Morrison said suddenly, his voice tense with concentration. "Guards are sweeping the area, checking sight lines. Target preparation is beginning." Santos shifted her attention to the distant platform where their target would soon appear. Through her high-powered scope, she could see 2 figures in dark clothing moving systematically around the deck's perimeter. They were conducting counter-sniper procedures, looking for exactly the kind of threat she represented. "They're not amateurs," she observed, watching the guards' methodical search pattern. "Professional security team. They know the risks." The target had good reason to be paranoid. His organization had been systematically dismantled over the past 18 months, with key lieutenants either captured or eliminated by coalition forces. He was one of the last high-value targets remaining in the region, and everyone knew it was only a matter of time before he was located. Morrison adjusted his position to get a better view of the compound's eastern face. Guards are taking positions at both ends of the observation deck. Looks like they're setting up interlocking fields of fire to cover the exposed areas. Santos studied the security arrangement through her scope. The guards were positioned to provide overlapping coverage of approaches to the compound, but they were focused on ground-level threats. Her position, nearly a mile above and behind them, remained undetected. "Wind check," she requested softly. Morrison consulted his instruments. 15 miles per hour from 310 degrees. Gusts up to 18, but holding steady for the last 10 minutes. Pressure is stable. Humidity is low. The waiting was always the hardest part of any sniper mission. Santos had learned to use the time for mental preparation, visualizing every aspect of the shot sequence until it became automatic. She would have perhaps 3 seconds from target identification to trigger pull. Not enough time for conscious thought, only trained muscle memory. Her weapon was perfectly zeroed for these conditions, but she knew that mechanical precision only got her halfway to success. The other half depended on reading the environment, understanding how atmospheric conditions would affect her bullet's path, and executing the fundamentals of marksmanship under extreme stress. "Command, Overwatch 7. Morrison spoke into his radio. "Request confirmation on rules of engagement. Are we clear to engage if target appears with civilians?" "Overwatch 7, you are cleared hot. Mission parameters allow for acceptable collateral damage given the target's threat level. Use your best judgment on civilian proximity." Santos felt a familiar knot form in her stomach. She had never fired a shot that resulted in civilian casualties, and she wasn't planning to start now. If their target appeared surrounded by innocents, the mission would have to be aborted, regardless of the strategic consequences. Morrison seemed to read her thoughts. Intelligence says he rarely brings civilians onto the observation deck during security briefings. It's supposed to be restricted access only. Supposed to be, Santos repeated grimly. In her experience, intelligence estimates were accurate about 70% of the time. The other 30% could get people killed. At 8:15, activity in the compound increased noticeably. More guards took positions around the perimeter, and Santos could see vehicles moving between buildings. Through her scope, the distant figures looked like a complex choreography being performed in miniature. Target building showing increased activity, Morrison reported. Multiple personnel visible in the main structure. This looks like preparation for the briefing. Santos felt her heart rate beginning to increase and consciously slowed her breathing to compensate. The shot she was preparing to take would be the longest-range precision fire mission in the history of naval special warfare. Success would save countless lives by eliminating a terrorist leader responsible for planning attacks against civilian targets. Failure would mean the loss of an irreplaceable intelligence opportunity. Movement on the observation deck, Morrison said suddenly. 2 guards have taken positions at the corners. They're setting up communication equipment. Santos watched through her scope as the tiny figures prepared the area where their target would soon appear. The observation deck was approximately 12 feet wide by 20 feet long, elevated about 15 feet above the main roof of the compound. It offered commanding views of the surrounding valley, which explained why their target used it for his morning briefings. The platform also represented the only location where a clear shot was possible. Every other area of the compound was either underground, behind reinforced walls, or blocked by natural terrain features that made precision fire impossible. Wind is shifting, Morrison warned, checking his instruments. Backing to 305 degrees, speed increasing to 20 miles per hour. Santos made minute adjustments to her scope, compensating for the changing wind conditions. At 2,700 meters, 5-degree wind direction change could move her point of impact by several inches. She had to read the environment continuously and adjust her aim accordingly. Her radio crackled again. Overwatch 7, this is command. SIGINT shows target is moving to the observation deck now. Estimate exposure in 3 minutes. Morrison lowered his voice to barely above a whisper. This is it. Target is moving into position. Confirm your scope settings. Santos ran through her final checks with practiced efficiency. Scope magnification was set at maximum power. Windage and elevation were adjusted for current conditions. Safety was off, round chambered, trigger finger positioned correctly. Her breathing was deep and controlled, heart rate steady despite the adrenaline beginning to flow through her system. I have eyes on target building, she whispered. Standing by for acquisition. In less than 3 minutes, a figure would emerge onto that distant platform, completely unaware that death was waiting nearly 3 kilometers away, carried on the wings of a precisely calculated piece of metal traveling at 3,000 feet per second. At exactly 8:37, a figure emerged onto the observation deck. Santos watched through her scope as the man stepped into view, immediately recognizable from the intelligence photographs she had studied dozens of times. He was tall, wearing dark clothing, and moved with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to absolute authority within his organization. Target confirmed, she whispered in her throat like adult male, dark jacket, moving to the center of the platform. Morrison adjusted his spotting scope to track the same area. I have visual confirmation. Range is 2,697 meters. Wind holding steady at 20 miles per hour from 305 degrees. Santos felt the familiar calm settling over her as she entered the final phase of her preparation. Her breathing slowed to a deep, rhythmic pattern that would allow her to fire during the natural pause between heartbeats. The crosshairs of her scope were steady on the target area, waiting for the perfect moment to align with her quarry. The target was not making her job easy. He moved constantly around the observation deck, stopping at different positions to receive reports from subordinates who approached him with documents and verbal briefings. Each time he paused, Santos would begin her firing sequence, only to have him move again before she could complete the shot. He's security conscious, Morrison observed. Never stays in one position for more than 15 seconds. Santos had anticipated this behavior from studying his profile. The target had survived as a terrorist leader for nearly a decade by being unpredictable and paranoid about his personal security. He understood that standing still made him vulnerable to precisely the kind of threat she represented. Wait for the pattern, she told herself, remembering advice from her instructor at sniper school. Every target has a routine, even when they think they're being random. She watched for 20 minutes, studying his movements and identifying the places where he consistently paused for longer periods. There were 3 locations on the observation deck where he regularly stopped to examine documents or point out features in the surrounding landscape to his subordinates. Position Alpha at the north end, she whispered to Morrison. He spends an average of 25 seconds there when reviewing written reports. Position Bravo in the center when he's giving directions to his people. Position Charlie at the south end when he's observing the valley with binoculars. Morrison took notes while maintaining his observation. Confirm on Alpha and Bravo. Charlie position puts him partially behind the concrete barrier. Might not be a clean shot from our angle. Santos adjusted her scope's position slightly, testing sight lines to all 3 potential firing positions. Position Alpha offered the clearest shot, but required the longest hold time while waiting for him to appear there. Position Bravo was quicker to acquire, but had more background clutter that could complicate the shot. Position Charlie was partially obscured, but offered the most predictable timing. Wind check, she requested. 18 to 20 miles per hour, direction holding steady. Gusts are minimal right now, but I'm seeing some turbulence indicators at middle distance. The wind was perhaps the most critical variable in her equation. At 2,700 meters, even a small change in wind speed or direction could push her bullet several feet off target. She was depending on Morrison's experience as a spotter to read environmental conditions not just at their position, but along the entire flight path of a round. Through her scope, she watched as her target moved to position Alpha, exactly as she had predicted. He was examining a document while 2 subordinates stood nearby, pointing at various locations on what appeared to be a map or architectural diagram. Santos began her shooting sequence. Her breathing slowed, her finger moved to the trigger, and she began the gradual pressure that would release the shot. The crosshairs settled perfectly on the target's center mass. Then, he moved, stepping behind one of his men just as she reached the trigger's breakpoint. Santos eased off the trigger pressure and waited, her heart rate beginning to climb with frustration. Patience, Morrison whispered, somehow sensing her tension. You'll get your shot. The target moved to position Bravo, standing in the center of the observation deck while gesturing toward different areas of the compound. This position offered an excellent sight line, but he was moving constantly, never remaining still long enough for her to complete her firing sequence. Santos forced herself to relax and wait for the next opportunity. At these extreme distances, rushing a shot was guaranteed to result in a miss. She had trained for situations exactly like this, where patience was as important as marksmanship skill. Movement at position Charlie, Morrison reported. Target is moving to the south end with binoculars. Santos tracked her scope to the southern end of the observation deck. Her target was indeed positioning himself to observe the valley, but a concrete barrier partially blocked her view. She could see approximately 60% of his silhouette, which might be enough for a precision shot if she could read the timing correctly. The target raised his binoculars and began scanning the mountain slopes below his position. Santos realized with grim irony that he was probably looking for threats like herself, never imagining that death was already aimed at him from a distance that exceeded the range of most artillery pieces. This is it, she thought, beginning her final firing sequence. Her breathing became deep and controlled, her heart rate slowed, and her finger found the trigger's first stage of pressure. The crosshairs settled on the exposed portion of the target's torso. Santos began the smooth, steady trigger pull that she had practiced thousands of times during training. The rifle would fire at the exact moment between heartbeats when her body was completely motionless. Wind shifting, Morrison warned suddenly, backing to 300 degrees, speed increasing to 22 miles per hour. Santos had a split second to decide whether to abort the shot or adjust her point of aim for the new wind conditions. The target was in position, her weapon was ready, and she might not get another opportunity for hours. She made a fractional adjustment to her point of aim, compensating for the wind change, and completed her trigger pull. The rifle fired with a thunderous crack that echoed across the mountainside. Santos felt the weapon's recoil as the .408 caliber round left the barrel at nearly 3,000 feet per second, beginning its 4-second journey across the valley toward a target almost 3 kilometers away. Through her scope, she kept her crosshairs on the target area, watching for impact while Morrison called out the time of flight. Round away. Flight time, 4.2 seconds. Impact in 3-2. Santos watched in horror as her bullet struck the concrete barrier just inches from where her target had been standing. The round had been perfectly aimed for the wind conditions at her position, but the shifting air currents at the target's location had pushed it slightly off course. Her target spun around at the sound of the impact, immediately understanding what had happened. He was already moving toward the safety of the main building when Santos chambered her second round, but she knew the opportunity was lost. Target is moving to cover, Morrison reported grimly. Guards are responding to the sniper fire. They're scrambling to locate our position. Santos felt the crushing weight of failure settling on her shoulders. She had missed the most important shot of her career by a matter of inches, and now their carefully planned mission was falling apart around them. But even as she watched her target disappear into the safety of the compound's underground levels, Santos was already calculating the lessons learned from her first shot. The bullet impact had shown her exactly how the wind was behaving at the target's location, giving her information she hadn't possessed before. "Command, this is Overwatch 7. Morrison spoke into his radio. First shot was near miss. Target has taken cover. Requesting instructions. The response came back immediately. Overwatch 7. Maintain position if possible. Intelligence indicates target may return to observation deck within the hour. He needs to coordinate response to the sniper attack." Santos allowed herself a thin smile. Her target's paranoia worked both ways. He wouldn't be able to resist the temptation to personally direct the search for her position, which meant he would have to expose himself again. This time, she would be ready. The next 30 minutes were the longest of Santos' military career. Through her scope, she watched as the compound erupted into frantic activity. Guards rushed to defensive positions, vehicles moved between buildings, and radio antennas appeared on rooftops as the enemy attempted to coordinate their response to the sniper attack. Morrison kept his spotting scope trained on potential escape routes while monitoring radio frequencies for enemy communications. "They're conducting systematic sweeps of the mountain slopes," he reported. "Teams are moving out from the compound in expanding circles, but they're starting their search too close. They don't realize how far away we are." Santos maintained her position despite the burning pain in her muscles from remaining motionless for hours. Moving now would risk detection by enemy observers, and she knew their camouflage was effective only as long as they remained perfectly still. Her ghillie suit blended seamlessly with the rocky terrain, but any movement would catch the attention of trained security personnel. Target building showing activity, Morrison noted. Multiple personnel visible in windows. Looks like they're setting up communication equipment and observation posts. Santos watched through her scope as guards established defensive positions around the observation deck where she had taken her first shot. They were clearly expecting another attempt, but their focus was on closer ranges where conventional sniper attacks would originate. None of them seemed to comprehend the possibility of precision fire from nearly 3 kilometers away. Her radio earpiece crackled with an encrypted transmission from command. "Overwatch 7. SIGINT indicates target is coordinating search operations from underground command center. He's becoming increasingly agitated about the security breach." Morrison acknowledged the transmission while Santos continued her vigil. She had learned valuable information from her first shot, particularly about wind conditions at the target area. The bullet impact had struck exactly where she had aimed for her calculated wind hold, which meant the atmospheric conditions near her position were different from those of the target's location. Local weather patterns, she thought, remembering lessons from advanced marksmanship training. The valley creates its own wind currents that don't match the conditions up here. She began studying the terrain between her position and the target area with new understanding. The bullet's path crossed multiple elevation changes, including a deep ravine and several ridgelines that would create complex air currents. Her first shot had failed because she had calculated wind conditions based only on local observations. Movement on the observation deck, Morrison said suddenly. Guards are repositioning equipment. Looks like they're preparing for someone important. Santos focused her scope on the distant platform. Several guards had appeared carrying communication equipment and what appeared to be tactical maps. They were setting up a temporary command post on the same deck where her target had been standing earlier. He's coming back, she realized. He can't resist the need to personally oversee the search operation. Morrison adjusted his spotting scope to cover the same area. Confirmed movement in the target building. Multiple personnel heading toward the observation level. Santos felt her pulse quicken as she prepared for what might be her final opportunity. If she missed this shot, their position would almost certainly be compromised as enemy search teams expanded their sweep patterns. Extraction would become exponentially more dangerous, and their mission would end in failure. "Wind check," she requested, her voice barely audible. Morrison consulted his instruments carefully. Local conditions are 19 miles per hour from 295 degrees. But watch the trees in the valley. I'm seeing different wind patterns at various elevations. Santos studied the vegetation visible along her bullet's flight path, looking for indicators of wind direction and speed at different distances. Trees near the target area were moving differently than those closer to her position, confirming her suspicion about local atmospheric conditions. "Range verification," she whispered. 2,697 meters confirmed. No change in target elevation. At exactly 10:43, her target emerged onto the observation deck. This time, he was wearing body armor and a helmet, clearly aware that he was exposing himself to sniper fire. Two guards flanked him closely, and a third positioned himself with a portable radio. Santos watched as her target moved directly to the tactical maps that had been spread on a table in the center of the observation deck. He was pointing at different areas of the surrounding mountains, obviously directing the search teams that were looking for her position. "Target confirmed," she whispered. "Center platform, standing behind tactical table." Morrison tracked the same area with his spotting scope. "I have visual." He's staying close to the table, using it as partial cover. Limited exposure time. Santos began her firing sequence, but this time she incorporated the lessons learned from her first shot. Instead of using wind conditions at her location, she estimated atmospheric effects based on vegetation movement near the target area. The adjustment was subtle, but critical at extreme range. Her breathing slowed to the deep, rhythmic pattern that allowed maximum stability. Her finger found the trigger and began the gradual pressure that would release the shot. The crosshairs settled on her target's center mass, just above the tactical table that provided his only cover. "Wind steady at target area," Morrison reported softly. "Pressure stable. Green light for engagement." Santos felt the familiar calm descending as she entered the final moments of her shooting sequence. Her heart rate slowed, her vision tunneled to focus exclusively on the target area, and her finger increased pressure on the trigger with mechanical precision. The target leaned forward over the tactical maps, pointing at a location that was probably very close to her actual position. Santos realized with dark irony that he was directing his people toward the general area where she was hidden, demonstrating tactical knowledge that explained his survival in a hostile environment. Her trigger reached the break point, and the rifle fired for the second time. The .408 caliber round left the barrel with explosive force, beginning another 4-second journey across the valley toward its target. Santos kept her scope trained on the target area, watching for impact while Morrison called the time of flight. Round away. Flight time, 4.3 seconds. Impact in 3-2. This time, Santos watched through her scope as her bullet found its mark. Her target dropped immediately, struck center mass by a round that had traveled nearly 3 kilometers to reach him. The guards around him scattered for cover, unsure where the shot had originated. Target down. Morrison reported into his radio. Confirmed hit at 2,697 meters. Target is not moving. Santos felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion wash over her. She had just accomplished something that military experts had considered impossible, a precision sniper kill at a distance that exceeded all previous records. The shot had required not just technical skill, but the ability to analyze and adapt to environmental conditions that couldn't be measured from her firing position. Command, this is Overwatch 7. Morrison spoke into his radio. Mission accomplished. High-value target has been neutralized. Request immediate extraction. The response came back within seconds. Outstanding work, Overwatch 7. Extraction team is en route to your location. Estimated arrival in 45 minutes. Santos finally allowed herself to relax slightly, though she kept her rifle ready for follow-up shots if necessary. Through her scope, she could see chaos erupting in the compound as guards realized their leader had been killed by a sniper they couldn't even locate. Morrison was already beginning to pack their equipment for rapid movement to the extraction point. We need to clear this position in 15 minutes. Enemy search teams will be redirected to our area once they analyze the shot trajectory. Santos took one final look through her scope at the observation deck where her target lay motionless. The shot had been perfect, demonstrating that human skill combined with advanced technology could achieve what seemed impossible. But she also understood that success had depended on factors beyond her control: wind patterns, atmospheric conditions, and the target's decision to expose himself for a second time. That's why they call it the impossible shot, she thought, beginning her own preparations for extraction. Because sometimes the impossible is just barely possible. She had made history with a single trigger pull, but, more importantly, she had accomplished a mission that would save countless innocent lives. As she prepared to leave the mountain position that had been her home for 3 days, Santos felt the deep satisfaction that came from doing a difficult job exceptionally well under impossible circumstances. The extraction from mountain position proved almost as challenging as the shot itself. Santos and Morrison had to cover 6 miles of treacherous terrain while carrying their equipment and avoiding enemy search teams that were now actively hunting for them. The successful sniper attack had transformed their mission from covert observation to combat survival. Morrison led the way toward the designated pickup zone, using terrain features to mask their movement from potential observers. Behind them, Santos could hear the distant sound of vehicles moving through the valley as enemy forces attempted to locate the sniper position that had eliminated their leader. Search teams are expanding their pattern, Morrison observed, checking his GPS unit. They're moving systematically up the mountain slopes, but they're still starting too close to the compound. Our actual firing position is beyond their initial search radius. Santos struggled with the weight of her equipment as they descended through loose rock and scattered vegetation. Her rifle case alone weighed 43 pounds, and her additional gear brought the total load to nearly 80 pounds. The adrenaline from the successful mission was beginning to fade, leaving behind the physical exhaustion of 3 days in extreme conditions. They reached a checkpoint 15 minutes ahead of schedule, taking shelter behind a boulder formation that provided concealment from multiple directions. Morrison immediately established radio contact with the extraction team, while Santos provided security with her sidearm. Nightboard 7. This is Overwatch 7. Morrison spoke in his radio. We're at phase line Charlie, ready for pickup. LZ appears secure, but we have enemy search activity in the surrounding area. The pilot's voice came through clearly. Overwatch 7. Nightboard 7 is 5 minutes out. Be advised, we're tracking multiple hostile vehicles in your area. Pickup will be fast and dirty. Santos checked her equipment one final time, ensuring everything was secured for rapid loading into the helicopter. The successful mission would be worthless if they were captured or killed during extraction. Enemy forces would undoubtedly want to interrogate whoever had been responsible for their leader's death. Through her binoculars, she could see search teams working their way up the mountain slopes below their position. The teams were moving professionally, with proper spacing and overlapping fields of fire, but they were still searching areas that were far too close to the target compound. They don't understand the ballistics involved, she realized. They're looking for a sniper position at conventional ranges. Morrison folded his maps and secured his navigation equipment. Command estimates it'll take them at least 4 hours to reach our actual firing position, assuming they figure out the correct search area. By then, we'll be back at base writing after action reports. The sound of rotor blades echoed across the mountainside as their extraction helicopter approached the landing zone. Santos felt a surge of relief at the familiar noise, knowing they were minutes away from safety. The pilot would have to perform a dangerous landing on uneven terrain while potentially under fire from enemy forces. Nightboard 7, this is Overwatch 7. Morrison spoke in his radio. LZ is secure for landing. We are ready for immediate pickup. The UH-60 Black Hawk appeared over the ridgeline, flying low and fast to avoid potential ground fire. Santos could see the door gunners scanning for threats while the pilot maneuvered toward the improvised landing zone. The helicopter's approach was textbook perfect, demonstrating the skill of experienced special operations aviators. As the aircraft settled onto the rocky ground, Morrison and Santos ran toward the passenger compartment with their equipment. The loadmaster helped them secure their gear, while the pilot kept the engines at full power, ready for immediate departure. Go! 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 The crew chief shouted over the rotor noise. Santos strapped herself into a seat as the helicopter lifted off immediately, climbing rapidly to clear the surrounding peaks. Through the window, she could see search teams in the valley below, their vehicles looking like toys scattered across the mountainside. The flight back to base took 47 minutes, during which Santos had time to process what she had accomplished. The longest confirmed sniper kill in military history had been 2,475 meters, achieved by a Canadian Special Forces operator. Her shot at 2,697 meters had exceeded that distance by more than 200 meters, establishing a new record that might never be broken. Morrison was already composing his spot report on a ruggedized laptop, documenting the mission details that would be required for official records. Command wants a full debrief as soon as we land. There's going to be significant interest in the technical aspects of that shot. Santos nodded, though part of her dreaded the attention her success would generate. Military snipers generally preferred to remain anonymous, operating in the shadows without recognition or publicity. Her record-breaking shot would inevitably attract notice from military leadership, media organizations, and foreign intelligence services. The helicopter touched down at the forward operating base at exactly 12:37, ending a mission that had lasted 72 hours from insertion to extraction. Santos stepped onto the familiar ground with mixed emotions: relief at successful completion, satisfaction at mission accomplishment, and exhaustion from 3 days of extreme stress. Colonel Martinez, the base commander, was waiting personally to greet them as they unloaded their equipment. His presence indicated the strategic importance of their mission and the level of attention it had generated among senior leadership. "Outstanding work, both of you," Martinez said, shaking hands with Santos and Morrison. Initial intelligence reports suggest the target's organization is already fragmenting without his leadership. You may have prevented significant civilian casualties. Santos felt the deep satisfaction that came from meaningful accomplishment. The technical challenge of making an impossible shot had been secondary to the mission's purpose, eliminating a terrorist leader who had been planning attacks against innocent civilians. The formal debrief took place 3 hours later in a secure conference room with representatives from multiple intelligence agencies. Santos answered technical questions about equipment, environmental conditions, and shooting procedures, while Morrison provided detailed information about target observation and mission execution. The shot distance was 2,697 meters, Santos reported to the assembled officers. Environmental conditions included variable wind speeds and temperatures below freezing. The key factor was recognizing that atmospheric conditions at the target area differed significantly from those at the firing position. A ballistics expert from the Army's sniper school raised his hand. What modifications would you recommend for future extreme-range engagements? Santos considered the question carefully. Better environmental monitoring equipment that can assess conditions along the entire bullet path, not just at the firing position. Also, more training opportunities at distances beyond 2,000 meters. Most ranges don't accommodate shots at these extreme distances. The questions continued for 2 hours, covering every aspect of the mission from initial planning to final extraction. Santos answered honestly and completely, knowing that her experience would influence training and equipment development for future special operations snipers. That evening, alone in her quarters, Santos finally had time to reflect on what she had accomplished. The impossible assignment had been solved through a combination of advanced training, sophisticated equipment, careful planning, and a significant amount of luck with environmental conditions. But more than personal achievement, she thought about the lives that would be saved because a terrorist leader could no longer plan attacks against innocent civilians. The technical challenge had been extraordinary, but the mission's purpose gave it meaning that transcended any individual accomplishment. Her secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Naval Special Warfare Command. Staff Sergeant Santos, your exceptional performance on Operation Mountain Strike has brought great credit to Naval Special Warfare and the United States Navy. Your record-breaking shot demonstrates the capabilities that make our special operations forces the finest in the world. Well done. Santos set aside the phone and began cleaning her rifle, a ritual that helped her transition from combat operations back to garrison routine. Tomorrow would bring new training, new missions, and new challenges. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel proud of solving an assignment that military experts had considered impossible. The 2,697-meter shot would enter the official records as the longest confirmed sniper kill in military history. But for Santos, the real measure of success was simpler. She had done her job exceptionally well under impossible circumstances, and innocent people would live because of her skill and dedication. Outside her window, the mountain peaks where she had spent 3 days preparing for a single perfect shot stretched into the distance, already fading into memory as she prepared for whatever impossible assignment would come next.